Can you please bring the meeting to order?
Mrs. De Silva?
Here.
Mrs. Gillis?
Here.
Mrs. Rigby?
Here.
Mr. Valentine?
Here.
And Mr. Melody.
Here. For the Pledge of Allegiance, can we have Mr. Gill lead us tonight?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. All right, do we have a motion to approve the agenda for this evening as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, please call the roll.
Mr. Valentine?
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby?
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva?
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis?
Yes.
And Mr. Melody.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Okay, next up, we have a Tolles Career Center technical update. Mr. Ireland.
There we go. Thank you, everyone, for having me here tonight. I appreciate it. And I'll give you a very brief report, and I have a special guest to talk about her son's experience at Tolles. So Tolles started last week. We actually have 532 level 1 students, which is the largest level 1 class we've ever had. So we're very proud of that. There's been 132 students from Dublin City schools that are in level 1. Just to give you an example of what that means, last year our total level 1 and level 2 was 127 students. So we have more level 1 students this year than we had both classes. We have 65 level 2 for a total of 197 Dublin students at Tolles main campus. So we're very proud of that, and the Tolles is working hard. We've had to hire a few new instructors to handle all of this, but that went smoothly, and so far the school year has started out very smoothly. Another thing, we have hired Fanning Howie to start working on a master plan for Tolles. Tolles building is about 50 years old overall. We're starting to, with this increased enrollment, look at different issues with handling the students and where do we put them. So we've hired Fanning Howie, going to do a master plan for us. Hope to have that by January 23, and then we'll be able to figure out where we're headed at that point. Besides that, I'd like to introduce Karina DeCierno. She's the mother of a current Tolles student, Dublin parent, works for the city of Dublin also, and I will let her talk about her son's experience.
Thank you. This is my first board meeting. Not intimidating at all. Thank you for asking me to come here and talk to you a little bit about my son Michael's journey at Kaufman and at Tolles. Michael started Kaufman High School in 2018. He was involved in track, and then, as we all know, COVID shut everything down in the middle of his sophomore year. He was enrolled in a 504 plan and an IEP plan, was in place for his ADHD, his anxiety and depression, and he really struggled to stay on top of things. Kaufman is a wonderful high school, and we had full support for him every step of the way. When he told us just before his junior year he was not interested in attending college, our thought was, we've just got to get him through high school. However, knowing that he wanted to take a different path after high school, we decided to take a look at Tolles, and we asked him to choose a career path. Having a strong interest in art and mechanics and computers, he chose welding. He was selected into the program, but he got really nervous about attending a new place where he didn't have any of his friends. So he withdrew before school started, and as a parent, I let him do that. Of course, 3 weeks later, he found out that several of his friends were in the programs and he wanted to attend. I tried to see if he could get back in, but at that time, due to COVID precautions, they were doing smaller class sizes. The middle of his junior year was a turning point for him. It was January of 2021. He opted to stay home for virtual learning, and we quickly realized it was not a good fit for him. At the end of that month, he had zeros in all of his classes. He had not logged in or attended one single class. He had simply lost all motivation. Through lots of help with amazing teachers and intervention specialists at Kaufman, he got back on track and he finished his junior year virtually. Because of this continuing struggle, we insisted that he try out TOLS in the welding program his senior year. We just knew that he needed to try a different approach to learning. At this time, he was ready, and all of his friends were at TOLS and they were loving it, and he was able to go, as a senior, into year 1 of getting the welding certification. He also attended his basic classes at TOLS that year. In April of this year, 16 months after he was failing all of his classes, Michael earned a LIFT award at TOLS. This award is based on students' character, attitude, his passion about the program, and helping other students. He was nominated by his TOLS intervention specialist, who saw a change in him over a really short period of time. To be sitting there witnessing that achievement was simply amazing. Despite solid efforts, Michael just got a bit lost in the traditional path of high school to college. I am grateful that he decided to attend TOLS because it really is a good fit for him. He technically graduated from Kaufman this past May, but he is attending his second year of welding lab now and will earn that certification in May of 2023. This year, while in school, he'll work with staff to secure an internship and hopefully continue to work at the company after his certification is complete. He has a plan to work in welding when he's finished with TOLS, and we often hear how excited he is about his future plans. What I said to Dr. Hoadley at the LIFT Award program last April is, what a difference a year makes, what a difference a school makes, and what a difference a teacher makes. Michael was able to find his niche at TOLS, and his welding teacher, Mr. Pencil, is a wonderful mentor and instructor. Simply, we are grateful to be offered multiple ways and choices of education here in Dublin. Thank you.
Thank you, and if
Tom, I actually have a question for you.
I knew Chris, you were
you
going
did
to
it one
ask
time.
me some questions.
So obviously, the Intel stuff has been in the news lately. She just talked about the welding program. How you guys had new hires. How difficult is it for you guys to, especially with some of these really specialized type fields, to get folks who are both qualified and who you really want in front of the students?
Sure. I will tell you, I think it was a little bit more difficult than normal. We had to hire 2 new, we had actually an additional welding instructor because that program's just going crazy. That actually was a fairly easy hire. Again, the existing teachers and honestly the business advisory councils that we have at TOLS reach out to all the different industries, and so I think with that, the welding instructor, we were able to find it from an existing business advisory council member that decided to get the certification to be able to be an instructor. We had to hire 2 new cosmetology instructors and 2 new pre-nursing instructors. Those took a little bit longer, were a little harder, but down to the wire, right before school started, we were able to get them in there. But yeah, I think we're struggling the same as everybody else is and trying to find people. But interestingly enough, I think there are people out there that have that passion that want to teach and go into this field of service.
Awesome. And then this is probably more of a Brian question, but because you brought up the master plan, in all of our time, I think that there's been at least some enhancements to TOLS, but I don't know, probably there's bigger type discussions that are going to come out of this master plan. How does the financing work when TOLS is doing the building side of things in comparison to what we do as a local school district?
So TOLS has millage that our residents pay, and all residents of all the districts, such as Hilliard, Fairbanks, Jonathan Alder, and Tom, you would know them all.
West Jeff, London,
anything. So
Madison
they would
Plains.
use that millage, and they could go for a bond just like they would, but it would be in front of all the voters throughout all the districts that serve there. So something similar to that. I don't know how you're looking, if you have existing resources and like if you had a capital set aside or reserves
Yeah.
that you've done there. Likely, because I know, for example, Delaware Career Center did that a couple years ago. They consolidated campuses, and I know they had built up some capital reserves where they were able to use that without having to have a new additional levy. So I'm not sure where Tolles is at with that discussion.
Yeah,
but-
it's exactly correct, and we've been doing that for the last 5 years, have been setting aside each year out of the general fund for that purpose. Tolles is still operating on its one, I'm glad, great question, I was hoping that somebody was going to ask that. We've been operating on our 1.8 mil levy that started at the beginning. We've never gone back to ask for more, and actually we are operating on 1.6 mils. They took away 2 because we didn't need it for and again, Brian would understand that more than I do, but the auditor dropped it back down to 1.6. We can go and ask for that extra 0.2 to help pay for some of this without having to come out with any new millage or any new levy. So at the point after we get our master plan, figure out what we want to do, figure out what the costs are going to be, then we'll be looking at the overall picture. But yes, we have been setting aside money for that, and the second step is we have that extra 0.2 mils that are sitting there that we could go and ask the Madison County auditor for.
Yeah, it's the House Bill 920 effect that we've talked about. And I could talk about it for a half hour and bore you guys for a long time. But yeah, that would be the case, and with that opportunity. So,
Great. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you. All right, public participation for action items on the agenda. There are 2 people signed up this evening. Mr. Barnes. Just as a reminder, public participation is limited to 3 minutes per person. So just please state your name and your topics and then start. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Keith Barnes. I read most of the policies in process that are included in John's action items and wanted to make a few comments. Policy Code 2260 defines a school district community to include administrators, professional classified staff, board members, agents, volunteers, contractors, or other persons subject to the control and supervision of the board. However, the policy identifies parents as third parties, same category as vendors doing business within the Dublin City Schools. I would consider parents a major stakeholder within our schools. After all, it's their property taxes that fund most of our schools' budget. Referring to parents as third party says that parents are not one of the main people involved in their child's education. Something else I observed were the policies that identified civil rights coordinators or their designee to investigate allegations of bullying, sexual harassment, racial harassment, etc. Are the Dublin City Schools and our community assumed so systemically racist, homophobic, or transphobic that it requires designated civil rights coordinators in our schools? And just my perception is it looks more like a social political activism from my perspective. And the words equity and bias are used a lot in the policies, and how does the Dublin City Schools define them? Does equity mean creating sameness and eliminating meritocracy? Currently, only 2% of the students identified as gifted in the Dublin City Schools can be accommodated. I'd say it's a pretty underserved group. Does it mean equality of outcomes versus opportunity? Does it mean meeting certain quotas based on race, sex, national origin, sexual orientation, religion? What does bias mean? Does bias simply replace the term racist because people can accept being called biased versus racist? These policies may create more separation and divisiveness in our schools and community. What I've seen occur throughout schools in America are ideologies antithetical to the guarantees of Equal Protection Clause and federal civil rights laws. At the heart of the Constitution's guarantee of equal protection lies a simple command that government must treat citizens as individuals, not as simply components of a racial, religious, sexual, or national class. Dublin City Schools should provide every child an opportunity to learn and reach their God-given potential. Dublin City Schools should focus on learning gaps of all students, not just the protected classes, and use its resources to close these gaps, not create layers of bureaucracy that will not add value to the child's evaluation. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness should be a guarantee to everyone, and treating everyone with respect and dignity is a prerequisite to this right. And I want to thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. All right, next registered is Mr. Siegel.
Good evening. My name is Bob Siegel. My topic today is on action item 4C, specifically 2260, regarding the non-discrimination and access to equal educational opportunity. First, let me say that I have no issue with the general objective of the equal educational opportunity goal. My questions and comments tonight relate to the articulated means to achieve that goal. There's conversation in there about curriculum content. The superintendent, it states, shall review current and proposed courses of study and textbooks to detect any bias upon the protected classes, ascertaining if these materials, quote, fairly depict the contribution of both genders, various races, ethnic groups toward the development of human society. I'm not sure I understand what that means. Specifically, detecting bias and also fairly depicting the contribution of both genders, various races, and ethnic groups. That's what's unclear to me. What exactly is going to be looked for in these reviews of the curriculum and the textbooks? Is the deep dive going to see if there are enough individuals from each identity group represented in order to fairly depict the contribution of each group? Sounds like it. Unless there's evidence of overt omissions, this seems unwarranted and unwise to me. Let me give you an example of what I think the outcome of this policy is. I happen to be Jewish. Jews represent less than 2% of the population in the United States. Jews represent less than 1/4% of the population of the entire world. It's a tiny, tiny number of people, actually. Does this policy being recommended mean that we need to limit the Jewish contributors to the development of human society, lest we overrepresent them at the expense of other groups? Albert Einstein makes the cut. Sigmund Freud or Niels Bohr, great scientists, don't, because it might overrepresent them to make room for others. Is that what's being stated here? This sounds crazy to me. I urge the board to look carefully at what is being suggested in these policies before you make a determination to implement them. We certainly should treat all individuals fairly and equally. Meaningful contributors to science, mathematics, medicine, and other endeavors should be studied and celebrated, regardless of who they are or what ethnic group or religion they may be part of, or what their gender may be. I fear that what is being recommended is something very different than
Mr. Siegel,
simply...
your 3 minutes are up. Could you please wrap up your comments?
Well, can I just wrap up with the last paragraph? There's a significant difference between treating every student and person equally under the law, including providing equal opportunity for all and treating everyone with dignity, versus some version of equity, which appears to be the direction to which we're heading. I'm in favor of the former, not so much the latter. I implore the board to fully understand the policies being articulated, slow down, help our administration focus on educating our children, giving every single one of them an equal opportunity, and not try to change the world.
Could you please wrap up? Your 3 minutes have well been over.
what we need to do is now blow up the system. We're not equipped to do that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mr. Melody, if I may.
Yes.
The policies that were addressed tonight by both of the gentlemen who spoke, the policies are currently board policies. The only thing that we will be asking for tonight is, if you look on the policies, the technical corrections, which is changing the names of folks who are no longer on the administrative team, or changing the technical roles of people who are currently on the administrative team and in new positions. So as we look at the points that were made by the two gentlemen who spoke with us this evening, if the board were to not approve these policies, the policies are already there. We would just have the wrong names available for the public. So just for both of the gentlemen who spoke, these are existing policies. I haven't looked to see when they were officially adopted. They are Neola policies that I'm pretty sure are standard across districts. And if the board would like, we could take a look at the origins of the policies and the topics that were discussed by our speakers this evening. But just wanted to clarify what the process is for technical corrections this evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And I guess I probably could have just said that
Yes.
here.
So next up is superintendent comments. So take it away.
So technical changes are names and positions. So that's the policies that are on for technical corrections this evening. We have the first reading of several other policies today, thanks to Mr. Valentine and Mrs. De Silva for their time with the work on our policy committee, and I'm probably stealing some of your thunder in the committee reports. These are mostly tech-focused policies. Some of them we've been sitting on for a little bit of time, as when you get a technology policy and it talks about social media and it talks about technology, as soon as you adopt it, there is the potential that it's going to quickly become out of date. So we make these recommendations for a first policy tonight, knowing that the tech policies may need to require adjusting and adapting over time as we move forward. Chris, Mr. Valentine and Mrs. De Silva can speak to the fact that we tried to be as specific with the guiding principles that we applied here, but not specific to the social media or the specific tools that we would be using. We took MySpace out of some of these because the original policies that we had at one point had MySpace. And unless you're old like me, you don't know what that is. So we're trying to get those, and those policies for first reading are up tonight. A second question for the board during my report. We have been steadfast since we amended our public participation policy that we would only allow participation for action items on the agenda. And as we look at the first reading of policies or the first reading of curriculum, I think it may be wise for us to look at a shift a little bit there so that the public would be able to share their thoughts during first readings of policies and first readings of curriculum. I know we had some folks who wanted to speak during the first reading when we looked at the 95 phonics program. And we said, no, you can't speak until we have action on that. From an administrative point of view and from a Board of Education point of view, it may be beneficial. And I think it does create the kind of dialogue that we would expect as a community to allow those comments to be given at the first reading. Because then if we've got a really smart community, we've got very energetic and involved parents in some cases, it would allow us to potentially make changes or respond appropriately if points were brought up. It doesn't require policy change. That's a change that we would make when we set the agenda. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. I talked to legal and talked to Jessica today. We just have to be consistent. We can't waffle back and forth depending on whether we want people to talk or don't want people to talk. So from a transparency standpoint, I think that there is benefit to saying for first readings of policies and curriculums that starting at our next board meeting, we would allow public comment for that. Any thoughts from board members?
I like that idea, actually, because I know during the curriculum, the second reading, there were still questions, there were things that were brought up, from community members, and I think having that earlier would be helpful.
I would agree. I think it's beneficial not only for the meeting, but as people in the community watch these meetings and they have additional thoughts, there's time to really contemplate, what the thoughts are, and I think that's our job, is to listen and try to make the best decision with all of the information and all of the input that we can.
Okay, so when we set the agenda for the next meeting, we will communicate that with our public and make sure that that's something that's enumerated in that public participation portion of the agenda. Planning Next, Mrs. Venny and I have been working with our partners at Planning Next. We have on our schedule tentatively right now, and want to get on the board member schedule, a work session, kind of a 5 to 7 dinner meeting on October 24th, where Planning Next will come and share the results with the board for the community survey that will launch on September 1st. The community survey that will launch on September 1st will be open for the entire month of September, and we will use all of our publications, channels, or social media, the tools available for us to get that survey so that as many parents and community members as possible will have the opportunity to participate in that survey. At the same time, we were also going to piggyback with a Fallon Research Survey, which is our annual community satisfaction survey. That will be in early September, and I've invited Mr. Fallon to our November board meeting to share his thoughts and input from that survey with us in November. And Paul will do an excellent job then. And we've got some questions that will be both on the voluntary participation survey and on the sampling survey. And Mr. Fallon will be able to walk us through the statistical differences and how those two different instruments will allow us to kind of get a broader picture. So we'll have both of those tools open in the month of September, and then we will share with both the board and the public those results as we then start to come together around what we had from our focus groups in the survey to get a first draft for a vision plan, a master facility plan, and a direction for where we go forward as a district. So that will all be launching here in early September. We've been spending a lot of time as an administrative team working to stay focused. And as we look at our intentional focus, there are a lot of things that are really important for us in this community, but there are only so many of those things that we can influence in the school district. And then there are a lot of things that we can influence, but not everything we can influence is where our focus should be. And I just share this slide with the board and with the public because you will hear us using the terms, is it important and can we influence it? We have a lot of things in our world, in our community, that are critically important. There are a lot of things that we don't have any influence over as an individual school district, and we want to keep our focus on the things that we are able to influence and we are able to keep our focus on when it comes to educating our children. So I shared this simply, if you hear us using these terms, yeah, it's really important, but it's not something that as a school district we can influence. We're going to try to keep our focus on the things that are really important and that we can do something about and make a difference. And with that comes our assurances, and assurances based on our values and the values that are part of our culture playbook and part of our VBO in terms of taking responsibility, always growing and better together, we shared with our administrative team, and our administrative team has been sharing with our staff and with our teachers, that we are always going to try when we interact with parents, with our community, with leaders, we're going to assume positive intentions. And we want people to know that even though there might be times that we disagree, there are positive intentions in the work that we do as a school district. We are going to keep student-centered and are student-centered. There's an awful lot of conversations right now in Central Ohio about what do we owe students as professional educators. I can tell you that in the Dublin City Schools, students are first, kids are first, and that is a shared value among all of the employees, the administrators, the parents. That's where we want to focus. We're getting better, and we're working extremely hard on intentional communication. The amount of times that we've already kind of pressed pause this week and said, no, don't make that a separate email. Now, don't make that a separate communication. We're going to send out a parent e-news next Monday. We're going to send out a staff e-news today. And we're working on, and this came from PTO focus groups, don't overload people. Keep your communications concise, clear, and to the point. Even some of you in our weekly reports ask that we keep our weekly reports concise and brief and to the point. So we're really going to focus on that attentional communication. And with that, we're going to hold each other accountable and support each other in that work. And then finally, and I appreciate you as a board allowing us to do this, when you send us concerns and complaints that come to you, it allows the right people to have those right conversations with our parents to get problems solved and to work in a proactive way. I think each of you over the past couple weeks have sent me something that I've been able to get to the right person. And when those conversations come from a building principal, when it's a parent concern, that relationship gets built. And that's how we want to be able to do things. So these are things that we've been working on during the month of August with our leadership team, with the building level leaders, and as the superintendent, to keep that intentional alignment and focus on what are the values that we're working on each and every day. So we're focused, and we're working really diligently to stay in our lanes, in our spaces, and keeping kids in the center. Upcoming community conversations, and we're going to change the title from Community Conversations to Community Coffee because we had lemonade. And, you know, if we're going to call them community coffees, we probably should have coffee. So Community Conversations on September 20th will be at the Dublin Chamber, and that's 8:30 to 10. I will give a similar recap of the Culture Playbook for anyone who wasn't able to join us at the previous community conversation. We'll have copies available for anyone who's there and who's interested. And then we return on October 18th to an evening here at Emerald Campus, where we will once again, board members, we'll have a board member or two with us. And I think this is so much more productive than giving folks 3 minutes for them to talk and not having the engagement. This allows us to have real conversations about real issues. Thanks to Mr. Melody, who joined us last week for our community conversation. In-depth conversations, open dialogue that I think was very productive. Any questions from members of the board?
All right, thank you for the update. So now we have item 4C. It is recommended by the superintendent the Board of Education approve the attached policies for technical corrections. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, questions or comments? Okay, please call the roll.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
and Mr. Melody.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Okay, And next, we have treasurer comments. Mr. Kern.
We have a light agenda this evening. We have approval of 2 purpose clauses over at Sayada High School, the Purple Star Club and the high school class of 2026. Just a reminder on these purpose clauses, as we assign and monitor the activity, the financial activity, it's why it's underneath my group, but it also has, whether it be Mike Allring at the secondary level or Samantha House at the elementary level, review those, or even Mrs. Schwanke actually review some of these purpose clauses. So work hand in hand. We do have a few donations this evening. As you can see here, we have Dublin Bridges to the high school for a food consumer service class, Women's Club to the Robotics Club for a student scholarship, and some various equipment to the Grizel Middle School athletic equipment, had a value of $4,100. So that's on the agenda items for this evening. And I just wanted to update one thing. Last week, had concurrently at the same time while we had our community conversation, since there was lemonade there, last week we also had 2 nights on Wednesday and Thursday to give our boosters and PTOs just some update on training, whether it be IRS stuff, board policy, or filings that you have to do within the state of Ohio. So it's the first time we've had that in person in a couple years, so I think it turned out pretty well. I'd like to thank Chris and Val from my office for being able to put that on, as they've done that a few times, and I hope our boosters, I think they always find it helpful in our PTOs. So that's all I have this evening.
Okay, thank you. All right, so for item 5D, it is recommended that by the treasurer that the Board of Education approve items 5B, approval of the student activity purpose clauses, and 5C, approval of donations. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Questions or comments? Okay, please call the roll.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
and Mr. Melody.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Okay, Deputy Superintendent comments.
Okay, good evening. I'd like to give the board an enrollment update this evening. Just to jog your memory a little bit, last fall we spoke a little bit about enrollment, and then in January we presented what really amounted to a spot redistricting, where we needed to move some students out of DEP to account for the rapid growth there. And we moved about 154 students out. Some went to Pinney and some went to Glacier Ridge. And I just want to give a quick shout out to those principals. They really worked together as a team to make sure those students were welcomed, and we've had a really great start. We also moved 100 students out of Hopewell. And again, just to jog your memory, Hopewell was at capacity when it opened. We moved the 100 students out because we did have some room at Indian Run, and it was just better in terms of services and resources. So the problems that we solved were a little bit different, but we had a great start to the school year. So really, really pleased with the teamwork that led to that. Now, I present this update tonight because we do still have some issues to be concerned about in the Northwest Quadrant. So this is a lot of numbers on this screen, and I'm not going to read them all to you. You can reference them later. But this is the number of students sitting in seats today. What is not captured here is DCS virtual. I just wanted to note that our enrollment has gone down significantly in DCS virtual as we've come out of COVID. We have about 70 students enrolled in K-8 virtual academy now. Again, as you recall, we had 900 last year at this time. At semester, we went down to about 500, and now we're down to 70. So those 70 students are not captured in this chart here. The number I'd like to draw your attention to is 7361. That's the bottom right. That's the number of elementary school students sitting in buildings today. Then, for comparison, this is the Cooperative Strategies report. You all saw that Cooperative Strategies report last year. As a reminder, Cooperative Strategies pulls data, everything from birth rates to building permits to transiency rates to interest rates, and they do their best guess on how many students we'll have attending. So what's really amazing is, if you look at the bottom right there, they were within 2. with their projections. Now, at issue, though, is they aren't exactly where cooperative strategies thought they'd be. So as you can see, Abraham Depp, even having moved 150 students out, they are 90 over what cooperative strategies thought, and that shouldn't be any surprise to us. A lot of building going on up there. We also have more students than projected at Daniel Wright and at Bailey, and just a few more at Indian Run and Hopewell. But we counterbalance it because we have buildings with less students than were projected. So it really is kind of neat. They were within 2 students, but we do have a problem still at Abraham Depp Elementary. Here's just a visual depiction of the exact same data. Now let's look at middle school for just a moment. You can see again our current enrollment's 3809 in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and cooperative strategies had projected 3891 for a difference of 82 students. So we're lower in middle school than projected. What that means is the families that moved in that northwest quadrant have younger kids than maybe cooperative strategies estimated. But they grow up, right? So they're coming to middle school at some point. Carr Middle School is over what had projected, but not significantly. And again, there's a visual depiction. So I share this information with you because we are over capacity at Depp still. We are at or slightly over capacity at Pinney and at Glacier Ridge, and at Deer Run. As a matter of fact, we've had to cap some grade levels at those schools because we're running out of square footage there for those students. So we do have some decisions to make and some conversations to have with our community, but I wanted to present these numbers to you tonight so that I, myself, Dr. Marshausen, and Mr. Stark could answer some questions if you have them. And I can flip back.
Questions?
No questions.
Well,
Any questions?
I think one of our challenges becomes when we look at the elementary graph and the elementary information, we could fix this, but it would require massive redistricting of elementary schools. And it would require redistricting of elementary schools in a substantial way, shifting kids from Bailey to Indian Run, kids from Indian Run to Riverside, kids from Scottish to Indian Run and Bailey, and eventually moving kids out of Depp, out of Pinney and Glacier to give space for kids who are moving into that northwest quadrant. My concern is I wouldn't want to do that twice in 3 years or 3 times in 6 years, because we will have a master facility plan. And as we look at the projected growth over time, we're in all likelihood going to be looking at another elementary school in that northwest quadrant at some point. That gives us limited options. One of those options would be Mr. Melody's favorite conversation that we would have. But short of moving a lot of people around until we give our voters an opportunity to look at a master facility plan, I'm not sure we're kind of running out of space.
To be clear, that's modular.
To be clear, that would be modulars.
Or redistricting.
Those are two things as board members that everybody loves to hear. Mr. Stark, if we were going to look at modulars for the 23-24 school year, if the growth rate keeps up at this pace, what's a timetable that's realistic?
The irony of this is we are almost exactly in the same timetable as we were last year with the drone modulars. So again, this would be hard pressed, because when you put up modulars, it's not only obtaining them, there's lots of work to do with Union County, we had to do with Dublin, but with their zoning folks, with their planning folks, with Jerome Township Fire. There's a lot of pre-work before you even start doing anything with it. We do have room in the southeast part of Abraham Depp to put 12 to 16 modular classrooms. And we would probably need at the next board meeting a resolution from the board allowing me to bypass a public bid but I would do a request for a proposal, so it'll still be competitive. It's just a public bid has a lot more steps to it. We have to obtain a designer, then you have to post for that, get a legal agreement, go to board approval for that, then you go back to the public bid. This timetable doesn't really give us that. We would be able to do the same thing we did with Jerome, do a competitive request for proposal, get that to the board, and we would look to purchase, or lease in this instance, the same type of modulars we did for Jerome. I don't know if you've been out to Jerome. Well, you were during the groundbreaking, you were, and you saw it was an enclosed hallway. Security for modulars are always challenging, but for the new set of modulars, you know, we have, there's only 2 ways in, you know, a back door and a front door. Both of them are with access control. Both of them are heavy with, we have lots of cameras out there. And the schools are becoming a little bit more mature in the Dublin City School Districts and how to operate modulars. So for example, at Jerome, while the time children are out there, they have all types of staff constantly out. And over at Abraham Depp, Mr. Ersham, who's the principal there, has good experience with modulars since he had them for years at Eli Penny. So he knows how to operate in some of the safety things that you'd want to do there. I mean, to Mr. Ersham's credit, he asked us years ago during that, we've actually put cameras where we can actually watch the students leave the main building, go to the modular. So all types of things we can do there. But if it's something that the board is looking to do, we would need action at the next board meeting to allow me a resolution to bypass public bidding, do a request for proposal, and start on that immediately, if that's something to do. Any questions on that process?
Yeah, I guess, yes, because if we need to move that quickly, my question is, how do we know who's coming for our 23-24 school year? How do we get a better projection? Because I'm assuming we're not going to want to redistrict something that we just redistricted. And I don't think that the problem is going away anytime soon. Do we have any idea how many more people are building and how many more students are can we get numbers on that to make a decision?
We have reached out, thank you, Mr. Gill, actually, thank you, Mr. Gill, for all of this, to Cooperative Strategies to get yet another updated report. So that would be 3 in 1 year, because this is just pretty unprecedented. So we are going to get updated numbers, but the numbers they ran in January or February, right, Mr. Gill, were already over 100-some kids from what they projected. So it's just fast.
And last year at this time, I would have said there were 1,700 homes completed with people living in them in Jerome Village. I think we're at 2,100 this year, and Mr. Gill shaking his head, and it's going to go to 4,000. So when you look at, if we're on pace, and I wish Mr. Ireland were still here, because we were talking earlier about construction and where it's going, and we hear national trends that housing market's slowing down. It's not slowing down here. We're about half built up in that area.
Mr. Stark, so we're going to get rid of the Jerome modulars, right?
Correct.
Why can't we just put those on a flatbed and take them to Deb?
That's a great question. That's a good question.
Great question.
So the drone modulars will need to be in place until end of May. You need to start installing the modulars in the spring to have them ready to go, because there's a lot of, to hardwire them into the building, there will be needs for fire safety, for fire alarms, all that needs to be wired in, and inspections would be happening right around the times we pull it up from Jerome. If there was a school year in between or even a semester in between, we could, but the fact that...
And when we look at numbers, if we were going to have a crystal ball, I would say we would probably need an additional section next year of each grade level, so that would be 6 classrooms, but it would be silly to put in 6 classrooms one year and then 6 classrooms the next, because at this pace, so that's a 12 classroom unit that we dropped at Jerome. A similar unit there would potentially get us to where we needed to be if the voters supported another elementary, and that was on the ballot in '24. Now we're getting close to that potentially being open in time to absorb what's next and what's coming. And then, if that were the case, a redistricting with a new elementary in the northwest quadrant, there are parts of our community that wouldn't be touched by that. Because at that point, if you've got 12 classrooms there and you've maxed out Deer Run, Glacier Ridge, and Penny, you're really just looking at the kids who are up in that area moving to the new school, and you're not talking about a lot of movement from our other elementary schools. And we can tell you, even though there's room in some of those schools, none of them feel empty. Like if you go into Indian Run, you're not walking around saying, where are all the kids? It feels like it's an elementary school. If you walk into Bailey, Cheryl's not going to say, hey, we got lots of space. There might be 8 seats in one grade level, 12 seats in another, but we don't have that kind of space that we could put a ton of kids.
With the 90 over number, what grade? I mean, is it really heavy in any one grade, or is it just kind of spread throughout?
You know what, I can answer that. It's spread out, like their 4th grade is huge, and so we did have to cap that, and students from DEP 4th grade are going, Mr. Gill, to DEP, or to Glacier. And, you know, that causes other problems, too, because then you have to take any 4th grader with a sibling, and they go to Glacier Ridge as well, and then you have to bus them. And then the next year, usually they want to stay, and so it becomes problematic whenever you have to cap a grade level. But I can get that answer very quickly for you. Are you already pulling it up, Mr. Gill?
And just when you say cap, I want to make sure that everybody
sorry.
understands. That means that there are no more seats. So if a new family moves into Jerome Village right now with a 4th grader, the 4th grader's not going to school at DEP, and we're going to send the 4th grader to Glacier or to Penny. And if the 4th grader has a 1st grade sibling, we give them the option, do you want your kids to go together?
Right.
And now we could have just put ourselves in a situation where if the 1st grader makes friends at Glacier, now we got to get the 1st grader there for the rest of their elementary career, or force them back where if they just moved here. So we put ourselves in a challenging position when we get to those caps.
And for further clarification, there's a couple buildings where we have done that because it is a huge financial decision to add a teacher when you have a bunch of move-ins. At DEP, it wasn't even a discussion because there were no classrooms. We could not have added another 4th grade section. There wouldn't have been a room to put them.
I think they have 6 1st grades at DEP
so
right
I did
now.
pull that up, Mrs. Rigby, and at DEP, there are, and this is just a bizarre pattern that you'll see. There, 1st grade's at 133, so they've got a little bit of room. 2nd grade, 136, almost exactly the same. Then you have a huge dip. In 3rd grade, they're at 116, 4th grade, 112, and 5th grade, 134. So they're within 20 or 30. Eversole is bizarre. They have 2 classes of 300 and a class of 200. I think it's their 7th grade that's very low, 6th grade, very low. So you can never tell. You just don't know. We can project, we can do our best, and then day one, we see who's there.
Can we get these slides updated, the enrollment slides updated with building capacity associated, so we can see
We sure can.
how over or how under each building is?
Mhm.
And if we would add portables, would we run into challenges from support space, gyms and cafeteria and those aspects?
We would, and that's.
Elementary would be approaching 1,000 students at that point.
And elementary school master schedules and structures are not built for that, so it would definitely be a Band-Aid. You'd have students eating lunch earlier and later. You would have a strain on your gym, your core spaces, your gym, your music room, your art room. Now, fortunately, the principal there has experience with that. He was at Penny, and we'll work with him to provide the support needed. But yes, to be clear, we would want this to be a short-term solution.
We would, but I would also say that because it's attached to the middle school, there might be some latitude in leveraging some of the space. Again, it has the largest kitchen amongst everyone else. It's not ideal at all, but it has a little bit more latitude there than would another school.
All right, thank you.
Okay, we'll get that information and we'll send that along to you by the end of the next week.
All right, thank you. That looks like we are on Chief Operating Officer comments.
Tonight, we only have one thing for the boards to review, and that is just our annual, asking the board to approve all of our bus stops. This is a tremendous, tremendous task that transportation, Brian Killian and his team work on all summer long, and they put this together for your review and approval. We got this to you earlier this year than last year, so it was a job well done by them.
All right, thank you. All right, item 8A. It is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve the bus stops for the 2022-2023 school year. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, questions or comments? Okay, please call the roll.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
and Mr. Melody.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Okay, Executive Director of Human Resources.
I'm going to jump in and take responsibility for the fact that I forgot to allow our student reps during my report to give their report. So without objection, before Mr. Boney gives his report, if either Mrs. Schwanke or Dr. Bailey could slide a mic over so that we can hear from our students.
All right, thank you.
No problem. Thank you, Dr. Marshausen, for the chance to speak. But my name is Soeba. I'm a senior at Dublin Kaufman, and I will be presenting the student report for today. So starting off, we are 4 days into the school year, so we are all really happy to be back. Lots of excitement, but also some discontent at being back to school. But overall, lots of smiles on the buildings. We're all really happy to see some of our favorite teachers and all the wonderful support that we've been getting transitioning back into school. We've also been really happy to see how well DCS Virtual is thriving. I know I myself was able to sit down and talk to my counselor, and I was just surprised at how many options I had and just all the different things I could do in my free period. But also we are having some class meetings at the high schools with freshmen and seniors, and I was lucky enough to have Dr. M at mine for the senior meeting, but those were really nice and just getting everyone caught up on the same page. We also have a few open houses coming up for the next few weeks. I know elementary, middle, and high school levels are having them, and Emerald Campus is having theirs on September 1st, so something to look out for students and parents, as well as new administrators, teachers, staff, and students just getting back into the swing of things, back into school buildings, not being online. So we're all really appreciating that. Along with sports starting up again, I know we had football Friday night this Friday for the first time in a while with COVID and everything, but Jerome, Kaufman, and Scioto were all pretty beached out with the same Spirit Week theme, so that was really fun. And some things that we're working on with the Student Representative Advisory Council is getting some outreach platforms set up on social media, such as Instagram and Twitter, as well as a district-officiated email, hopefully soon, to get more student input into our reports rather than just us, as that's our bigger hope, to voice the concerns and opinions of all students, not just us. We're also trying to finalize the recruitment process for our advisory council to have some juniors come on so we can make sure this is a long-lasting position and not just something that we're doing for 2 years. But yeah, this report has been a little shorter just because we are 4 days into the school year. Not many concerns yet, but thank you so much, and we're just super excited for this whole year.
All right, thank you. All right, I'll turn it over to Executive Director of Human Resources now for the update.
Good evening, Dr. Marchhausen, Mr. Kern, members of the board. It's a little bit anticlimactic to go after a student presentation, but here we go. So I'll start tonight with the certified agenda in human resources. You'll see 2 resignations that are on. Both of these were received after our last Board of Education meeting, and we're currently in the process of searching for replacements for both of those positions. There is 1 new hire and 3 salary changes on. And in total, we have 2 more intervention specialists and then 1 English language arts teacher that we are actively recruiting for currently. You'll see 2 certified substitutes listed. They'll provide specialized support and services this school year, along with approval for payment for a summer training that occurred after our last meeting that we had on August 8th and a brief leave of absence for one of our teachers. There's an attachment listing several teachers who will be paid for 6 periods of instruction for the coming school year, and then several attachments for supplemental as well as pupil activity supervisor contracts. These cover academics and sports for the 22-23 school year. And then you'll also note a few salary changes for supplemental contracts, and then 4 resignations for supplemental contracts as well. Moving on to our classified agenda tonight, there are 7 resignations on for your approval. There are also 11 new hires on this agenda, and a request to approve the same summer training that also occurred after our last board meeting as well. There's 5 salary changes and then an unpaid leave of absence request on for action. And then moving on to our stipends, there are a total of 8 stipends that are on this agenda for your approval. 2 of these are revisions to previously approved stipends for 6th grade orientation. This is due to a shift in staff providing this service. 3 of them are AP, U.S. Government, and Politics virtual course development request. These are broken into 3 payments with payout amounts that grow larger to reflect finishing development of the course. The other stipends cover training in 95 phonics core program, payment of RTI and PBIS leads, and then payment for work that will be done by the district equity team this school year. And that concludes the HR report. Any questions for me tonight?
Okay, thank you for the update. All right, item 10D. It is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve items 10A, personnel action items certified, 10B, personnel action items classified, and 10C, the stipends. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, questions or comments?
Dr. Bailey, I asked this question before through email. We talked about it, but just for the sake of public knowledge on it, the formation with the district equity team, you provided the explanation to me, but I think it, if you don't mind saying it again, it would be great.
Just like in my email, my response, Dr. Hamilton went through the process of sending out applications and things like that. And with her untimely leaving, I still wanted to give an opportunity for those who were signed up to do the work even during this year. And so it is a process. So we have our building equity leads, and then we also have our district equity leads. So.
All right, thank you. Okay, please call the roll.
Mrs. De Silva?
Yes.
Mr. Valentine?
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis?
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby?
Yes.
And Mr. Melody?
Yes. Motion passes 5-0. Okay, are there items for future agenda items?
Just a note that in September, our first meeting's on a Monday, our second September meeting is on a Tuesday, and that's so that we can be in the city council chambers. Our meetings conflict, but it is a great location for us to come, and our hope is that we'll have our National Merit Award winners identified by that point. And it allows us to welcome them in a larger space and a beautiful space that is great to share with the city a couple times a year.
All right. That's great, thank you. All right, if there are no other comments, do we have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.